Welcome to There Is a Method to the Madness. My name is Rob Maxwell, and I'm an exercise physiologist and personal trainer. I'm the owner of Maxwell's Fitness Programs, and I've been in business since 1994. Today is Thursday, February 2nd, and today's topic is about how many exercises and how much volume we should be doing per muscle group. This question comes from Natalie, who's a personal trainer in Nashville, Tennessee, and also happens to be my piano coach and teacher. And she gets kind of stuck with questions like this, and I can understand why, because there is so much confusion surrounding this topic. Before I get into that, let me thank today's sponsor, Jonathan and Lyn Gildon of the Gildon Group at Realty Pros. They currently have over 275 star reviews on Zillow. They are absolute professionals. Whether you're looking to sell your house or find something new, give them a shout. I will put their information in today's show notes. All right, so how much volume should we be doing? So this is a matter of what we call acute program variables. This is how we split up doing types of workouts. So when we talk about acute program variables, we're talking about how many sets we should do of an exercise, how many reps we should do, what is the tempo of the rep, what should the load be? How many exercises should we do? Those are just some examples of what we call acute program variables. All right. So these are things that we need to basically move around and change and manipulate so we can get better adaptations of what we're trying to look for. So Natalie's question is basically about how many exercises should a person be doing when they're mostly training for mass and strength, so hypertrophy and strength, and trying to get bigger and stronger. She's mostly referring to her cousin, I believe, but this could apply to so many different people. And when she asked me this, I replied back, I said, that's an absolute great question because there is so much confusion surrounding that. And there is a method to the madness. So there are answers, which is pretty cool. So let's get into that. Now, if you follow working out at all, so I'm going to try to explain this because some people may really be thinking, well, what are you even talking about? I do this for my legs and that's what I do. And that's great. Now, if you are following people that work out a lot, though, you may see that they're doing a lot of different stuff for a lot of different muscle groups. So typically when people are training for hypertrophy, which is size and mass, and they're on bodybuilding style workouts, oftentimes you're going to see them doing many different exercises for each muscle group on different days. So a common split routine might be chest and shoulders and triceps on Monday, lower body and core on Tuesday, and then back and biceps on Wednesday. It could repeat back to Monday on Thursday, or it could be a day off and then repeat back the next day after that. Or another very common 3-day split routine could be chest and back on Monday, legs and shoulders on Tuesday, and arms on Wednesday, followed by repeat. I could keep going on. I mean, there are so many different ways to split up the muscle groups that really you can do them unlimited. I'm not saying it's all great because there's a lot of things we need to think about, but that's for another show. So that's an example of doing different muscle groups on different days. Now, some people take that split even further and they do a single muscle group per day. So they might do chest on Monday and back on Tuesday and shoulders on Wednesday and legs on Thursday and arms on Friday with core sprinkled in. Now, that one, again, we're not talking so much about how to split up the routine today, but I will say that one I don't overly advise because we tend to not work each muscle group with enough frequency to get adaptations unless we really split it up perfectly and do like parts of muscle groups on other days. But again, that's neither here nor there today. The most common way people split up their body when doing a split routine is they train each muscle group 2 times per week. And that's the most common way. And they typically split it up in one of two of those 2 ways I just explained a few minutes ago. All right, so that's what we're talking about. And by the way, I'm not advocating that. You can work your body, your full body, all in one workout, every muscle group, and it can be extremely effective. Or you can split up your routine and it can be extremely effective. And again, that is neither for today, neither here nor there today, because I'm going to talk about the amount of exercises per muscle group. All right. But I just don't want you to be led astray thinking that a split routine is ideal. It's good. And so is a full body routine. It really comes down to how much time do you have? What are your resources and things like that. Both can be extremely effective ways to work out, and both elites use both. So don't think one is necessarily for elite and the other for beginners. That is simply not true. Okay, so now what people end up doing when they don't know better is they just keep shotgunning their muscles with as many exercises as they can squeeze into the workout in the allotted time that they have for themselves, or until they run out of gas. So let's say they're working their chest and they may do what they normally do and have done, and then all of a sudden they throw in another exercise that they saw in Muscle and Fitness magazine, and then they throw in another chest exercise that they saw, say, on Instagram. And before you know it, they might have done 6 or 7 exercises for the same muscle group. All right. That ends up happening when people really just don't know and they believe that more is better. More is not better. All right. Now, as I spoke with Natalie today a little bit during our piano session, there is like an art to it as well, because we do have data, but then at the same time, everybody's a little bit different. So we don't know exactly where that fine line is, but there is a fine line of not doing enough and doing too much. We do have some information how to help us make a qualitative decision on that. All right. So instead of just saying, I'm going to add all these different exercises, let's get down to what science tells us a little bit. All right. So every muscle group has a multi-joint movement associated with it. That's what we would call the compound lift or the big lift. So in the case of chest, all right, the big compound movement could be the bench press. That is the compound movement. That means you're working your chest, but helping out is also the shoulders and the triceps. Now, the joint actions for that is horizontal shoulder adduction, shoulder flexion, and elbow extension. That's the joint action for a major chest press or bench press. I repeat, that is the joint action for a major chest press. What that means is if you do another version of a chest press, you are essentially working the same joint actions. If you're doing a bench press, you are doing shoulder horizontal adduction, shoulder flexion, and tricep extension. Okay? If you move over to the hammer chest press machine, you are working the exact same joint actions. If you go to dumbbell presses and do the same movement, you are working the same joint actions. Now, yes, there might be some angle differences. So that means like where you are in space, there's going to be different angles of how your body is positioned. So for example, some people say, well, so if you're on an incline, you're working more of the muscle fibers of the upper chest. And if you're on a decline, you're working more of the muscle fibers in the lower portion of the chest. So in other words, if you're inclined up, say at 45 degrees, you're working more of the fibers of the upper chest. But if you're declined at, say, a 20 or 30 degree below, all right, so now you're working, say, the lower fibers of the chest. All right, some truth to that, but it's the same joint action. And if you're training your muscles, regardless of what muscles, close to failure, that means you are recruiting every muscle fiber in that muscle. And that's all you can do. So really, when you say, oh, we're hitting these from different fibers, there's not a whole lot of truth to that. I mean, there is truth that you are hitting them from other angles, but saying that you are now working all these different parts of the muscle really isn't that true. Okay? So I'm not saying don't do variety. What I am saying is understand that each muscle group has a multi-joint exercise, and there's nothing wrong with changing the variety, and I'll get into that at the end. But just understand that changing it from one to the next is not changing a whole lot. And if you're adding on exercise after exercise, which means set after set, you could potentially be overtraining. Okay? So every muscle group also has a primary exercise, what we call a single joint exercise. Sticking with the chest, that primary or single joint exercise is the fly. Now, you lay on a bench and your arms go out to the side with dumbbells and you're bringing them closer together. That is a fly. Or you can do the same thing with a cable machine. Or you can do the same thing seated down on a seated machine doing, say, a pec deck. It is still a fly. That motion all by itself is called horizontal shoulder adduction. That's what it is, regardless of where you do it. So every muscle group has a single joint exercise, okay? So take the quads. The compound or multi-joint exercise is predominantly going to be the squat. The single joint exercise is going to be the leg extension. The compound exercise for the hamstrings is going to be a deadlift, or it could be the squat as well. The primary is going to be the leg curl. So every muscle group has these. So first understand that, okay? Well, actually that's second. First, your understanding is that even though you might be changing the variety, changing the angle of the movement does not really change the exercise a whole lot. That's the first understanding. Second understanding is understanding that every muscle group has a primary and a compound movement. All right, so we start there. All right, Coach Natalie, when people are trying to work different muscle groups, they should absolutely pick a compound movement that they want to do. And then they should pick, most of the time. Now, if we're training for hypertrophy, if you're not training for hypertrophy, you don't necessarily need to even pick isolation exercises unless you're working on them for a specific reason. But if you're training to hit all of the muscle and try to get the failure in the best way possible, we should have a compound movement, which is multi-joint, and a single joint movement. So that's the next thing to understand. That's where we can now start to build our program. Now we can talk about volume. There's been all this different talk about volume. Now, the NSCA, National Strength Conditioning Association, has done a ton of work on strength training. So they've given us some black and white data. And essentially what they say is that if you're doing higher reps, all right, because volume is volume. If you're doing more reps, less sets can be effective because you're simply doing more numbers. So if you're doing higher reps, let's say in the 15 to 20 range or 12 to 20 range, probably more adequately, then 2 to 3 sets per muscle group, if you're training for endurance like that, can be very effective. Now, if you're training slightly moderate to lower reps, then 5 to 6 sets per muscle group can be effective. There's been many studies that show 2 to 3 sets being very effective. And there are even studies showing that a single set can be very effective. All right. But now we're starting to put together some of this data. So now we're talking a maximum 5 to 6 sets per exercise. All right. Now let me give you some more data that they've come up with in recent years. There has been data that has shown that 10 sets per week for most people on a given muscle group, that was a mouthful, is very, very effective, with 20 being the utmost maximum anybody should ever do. And that was a little iffy whether or not it was still effective. So that was per week. All right, 20 per week. Now think about what I said earlier. That's pretty cool, right? Because now the numbers are all starting to come together. Let's say if somebody's working out 2 times per week per muscle group, and now let's say they're picking a major primary exercise that they like, and then a major compound exercise that they like. Now that's 2. Now, if they're doing, say, maximum of 5 sets that the NSCA recommends, remember 5 to 6, then 2 times 5 is 10. Lo and behold, one of their workouts in the week, they have 10 sets. Then they work out again, that's 10. And then they have the maximum of what research really supports as being effective. All right? So that gives us some guidelines. Now we have to say, well, wait a minute, what about variety? Couldn't I do a couple sets of flat and then a couple sets of incline just because I like to change it up a little bit? And then a couple sets of, say, cable flies, and then a couple sets of pec flies. And I'm using chest as the example just because it's really easy for me to do, honestly, and I'm just trying to keep this consistent. And the answer is yes. So really what the NSCA and most strength conditioning research states is that it comes down to volume, meaning the amount of sets and reps, that the body doesn't know a huge difference between the types of exercises. So let's say if somebody's doing push-ups and then flat dumbbell presses and then incline machine presses, those are like 3 exercises, but they're all the same joint action. So collectively put those together as sets. So as long as we're keeping it to, say, 10 sets per workout, maximum 10 sets, because we're talking these people were fully recovered, eating properly, and they're getting, their gains still. So that was a maximum 20 sets. And, I'll finish up by talking about the variables that we want to consider with that. But that's like the maximum. But then everything all fits in. So instead of doing like 20 sets per muscle group per workout, we're doing like 10. And yes, you can split it up. Like you can do maybe, if you want to keep it simple, just do a compound and a primary. Like, I just want to do 5 sets of push-ups and then 5 sets of dumbbell floor flies because I like to keep everything as basic as possible. And that would be like maximum. I'm not trying to say that that's a little bit of work. That's a lot of work. I'm just saying like that could be simplicity with maximum work. That's fine. Or maybe you're going to say, I want to do a couple incline, a couple decline, a couple flat, and then a couple different versions of flies. When I say a couple, like a couple sets each. Okay, that's fine too. It all comes back to volume. Like how much work. That's at least the black and white quantity portion. Volume is the amount of sets times the amount of reps times the load. And if we're training for hypertrophy like this young man is, then we really should be in that 6 to 12 rep range. So that could be a lot of volume. All right. So there is the science on that. We want to make sure we hit a compound. We want to make sure we hit a primary. We want to make sure that we don't exceed 10 sets per muscle group in the workout. And if we want to use some variety, that's great. Now let's talk a little bit about when not to use too much variety. So we had that conversation as well. So ultimately, your body doesn't know the difference, but our brain does. And when we're trying to build strength, I always try to keep some exercises nice and consistent to build on continuity. So let's say what have I been using? Incline Smith machine chest press. I've been using a lot for my compound on chest, and I've been measuring that more. All right. So I might keep that consistent for a good month. And then every time I'm working chest, I'm doing that exercise and I'm trying to overload with more weight because it's a compound movement. I'm trying to get stronger. And I know if I'm getting stronger, I'm getting bigger, which is the goal, more muscular. Okay. But then let's say some of the primaries, some of the, more aesthetic stuff that I might be doing, like some bicep and tricep stuff. Well, I'm not overly concerned with overload because, if I curl 100 pounds, that's no longer the goal. I could care less how much weight I actually curl. So then I might get away with using a lot more variety and saying, I don't really feel like doing curl bar curls today. I'd rather do different versions of dumbbells today. And I might get up to 10 sets and do that. But I might use a lot of variety. So really it comes down to some exercises we want continuity on so we can overload. And those would be more the compound exercises that we're really trying to get stronger on, like bench press and chest press, like pull-ups and pull-downs, like squats and deadlifts and leg presses, things like that. You're going to want to keep as mainstays and nice and consistent. And then some of the more aesthetic stuff, you can basically move around. I mean, you can move around all of it. Like the fact that you're exercising and training and putting focus into it is the most important thing. But like if we're thinking, are there areas I should really just remain constant on and consistent at least for a month? Then yes. And that's the ones we're really trying to focus on getting stronger on. And they're going to be the more multi-joint exercises with that. All right. So, and then finally, I want to add, everybody is different. So that's what the data says. And yes, I know some people that do 25 sets of a particular muscle group per workout. And I'm sure in my youth, I was dumb enough to do something like that. But I mean, dumb, at least I wasn't at the bar. I mean, I was during those days too. But I mean, at least at that time I wasn't. But that's just overkill and you're not going to get a lot out of that. Now, as you get older and you do that kind of volume, you're simply cutting into your recovery time and it's going to be hard to grow. And there are people out there we call hard gainers. They're ectomorphs, and that means that they have trouble gaining weight. They have trouble getting stronger. For those types of people, and only you know if that is you, if you have trouble putting weight on, if you have trouble getting stronger, then that's you. Less is more. Less is more. So you've got to be careful. You're not going to want to go to that edge of top volume. All right. And then there are people that maybe know that they can push the volume envelope more. And they know that because they've done it and they continue to get stronger. And if you're continuing to get stronger, it's working. If you hit a plateau, most likely you're doing too much, not too little. That's most likely. So I said earlier, the black and white and the quantifiable, that's the data I gave you. But then there is also the gray area where that's the art. That's the art. Like, that's the data, but you have to kind of work within that data and say, okay, I get it. Now, what works best for me? Because only you know. And you can't always go by like you now and you 20 years ago. We have a saying at the gym, the famous Stoic quote, you don't step in the same river twice. You're not the same either. So really there is this like really, not mystical, but definitely creative side to where you have to get in there and really figure out what works best for you. You have to get kind of heady and determine, let me think about this. Let me try to feel my way through this. Start with the data, but then feel your way through, because everybody is different. But I really hope that learning the science here helps. And I believe Natalie knew a lot of this already, and I told her it would be a fun topic, because it is, because there's so much misconception on this. And that's the point of the method to the madness, is like, okay, so we're doing more volume. That's great, but why? And where should we add the volume? Let's think about this a little bit. All right, now let me thank my second great, lovely sponsor, chiropractic physician, Dr. Doris Antos of Ormond Beach. Her office is on Granada Boulevard, and she's been in business well over a decade, and she graduated from the Great Palmer College of Chiropractic right here in Port Orange, and she is absolutely a practitioner of wellness. I will put her information in the show notes as well. Until next time, be Max Fit and be Max Well.